research. I've been involved in a research project on the idea of virtue and the exemplarity and what we might call the science of morality. So I'm a philosopher, but I've been working with scientists for a number of years now on this topic. And the origins of it, 2007, we had the beginnings work on this grant. Templeton Foundation sponsored a bunch of scientists to go to Cancun. That was not bad. We had a lot of fun and ended up resulting in some grant work. These are my collaborators, some great scientists, Warren Brown, Kevin Reimer, Michael Spazio, and James Van Slyke. And we had a great time working together on this project. One of the things that came out of this is we had several conferences. We had one in 2007, and this is bringing in a number of other scholars, particularly philosophers and religion scholars as well. But also a conference at Fuller and Caltech, which was both scientists and philosophers mainly. So first context, moral philosophy. If you look at the history of moral philosophy, modern history, there's this real big emphasis on rules and focusing on rules. You got this fellow here, Immanuel Kant, and then you got John Stuart Mill, and they were all about rules. And then in the 20th century, there became this kind of shift that maybe we should talk about virtue. So if we ask about rules answer the question, what should I do? Virtue theory, as a branch of ethics, answers the question, what kind of person should I be? And so we think about character and those sorts of things. By the time we get to the 1990s, we have folks who are developing on this. So someone named Rosalind Hirschhaus has done some work. We also have some pushback. So people like John Doris who said, well, maybe there isn't really this such thing called character. At that point, the philosophers start tapping into the psychology. So if you look at the second context, moral psychology, we have this stage one, we might call it. This stage basically says, well, morality is all about stages you go through. So you have children, then you have adolescents, and then you have adults, and there are certain stages people go through. By the time we get to 1990s, this becomes much more complex. We have all these different disciplines now talking about morality. So we have evolutionary theory, we have social psychology, we have economists and so forth. One of the big names is this guy named John Haidt, and our group is kind of tilting against him, which is kind of fun because he's really famous and we're not, so that gives us something to do. It's all about this notion of dumbfounding, that we have judgments but we can't really explain them, and this creates a kind of skepticism, which for me as a philosopher, I'm kind of worried about that. We like to pick some holes here. So one of the things you might note is that Haidt's work, a lot of it is on students, right? College students, and if you ask if they're representative or not, that's a problem. Some other scholars have developed an acronym for college students as research subjects. They call them WEIRDs: Western, Educated, Industrial, Rich, and Democratic. And so if we're asking about what is the normal way people behave, students might not always be the best option. South Dakota students, of course, accepted, right? They're all good and wonderful. Other folks have looked at a number of populations. So this is a study by Benedict Herman that shows if you look across cultures, there's differences. That's what that chart was showing. Our group is looking at the idea of moral exemplars, people who might be exceptionally moral in some categories. We might think of, for instance, Holocaust rescuers, people who were in World War II and who rescued Jews from the Nazis and other oppressed groups. And so if we start studying exemplars rather than college students, we might come up with something interesting. Public goods game is a game that kind of get at this. It's about cooperating. People start out cooperating in this game highly, but as you continue down that curve, they don't so much. And so maybe we should study these folks and see what we can see. What might we learn? Well, they might provide insight into practical issues, like what's called in philosophy a crazy or weakness of will. Many of us have weakness of will, exemplars don't. They actually do what they say they're going to do. Perhaps they should show us how decision-making actually works in an optimal case. If we look at how exemplars make decisions, maybe that can tell us how we ought to make decisions. We can learn from them by imitation. And this is precisely what a really old philosopher named Aristotle said. Aristotle said, how do we learn to be moral? We learn to be moral by observing moral people. Which brings us to puppies. Thank you.